And now we are going to discuss French President Emmanuel Macron. He will host President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He will also host President Joe Biden, and they're going to have talks tomorrow. Regarding this, we're going to go ahead and bring in a guest. I'd like to welcome to the program, for the moment, Stephen Moore, founder at the Ukraine Freedom Project.
Claudia, Don, great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. Thank you for joining. And we're also waiting for David DeBatto. I don't know if he can hear us, or if we can hear him. Geopolitical analyst and consultant. David,
can you hear us? We're encountering some technical difficulties.
Okay, well let's start with you, Stephen. Great to have you. And to start off this discussion, I'm going to go ahead and play a soundbite from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Let's hear it.
Great.
Russia has opened a new front in recent weeks. Kharkiv, a Ukrainian city of millions not far from the border with Russia, has been under Russian fire almost day and night. Houses, shopping centers, schools and factories have been hit. But above all, innocent civilians, women, men and children are being hit. We have coordinated closely with our allies on how to respond, as we always do. And we have reaffirmed this together. Ukraine has the right under international law to defend itself against attacks on its territory, its cities and its citizens. This also applies to attacks such as those in the Kharkiv area, which Russia carries out from positions in the directly adjacent Russian border area. In order to defend itself against such attacks, Ukraine can also use the weapons supplied by us and our allies, always in accordance with the international legal obligations.
Das gilt auch für Angriffe wie im Raum Kharkiv.
All right, Stephen, so this was pretty much breakthrough news last week. And this week, we're actually seeing some results on the ground there in Kharkiv. It looks like the Ukrainians are beginning to at least hold the Russians and start to push them back. But this comes with a little bit of a caveat, and that is that Joe Biden is saying no long-range weapons for use in further territory in Russia, just there along the border region, as well as Olaf Scholz still not supplying the Taurus missile, and also saying that they shouldn't hit deeper into Russian territory. I imagine that President Zelenskyy will meet with President Macron and President Biden and probably try to ask them to get a little bit further range. Do you think that this will absolutely be critical for Ukraine to be able to defend itself?
Don, this war will end when the Russian people, and the Russian elites in particular, feel the pain of their aggression. And as long as the war stays in Ukraine, on Ukrainian territory, that's not a good situation. And, my colleague, Anna Shetsova, her family lives in Sumy Oblast, which is right next to Kharkiv Oblast. They're about 20 minutes from the Kharkiv border, and they're about 30 miles from the Russian border. And there's 100,000 troops massed outside Sumy Oblast. And according to President Biden, those people are not to be protected. So my colleague Anna's parents are wide open for Russian aggression, for Russian artillery, because they don't live in Kharkiv. This is not a sustainable policy. And I think we're going to see Biden keep walking it back, and we're going to see an increased use of U.S. and European weapons inside Russia.
Now, welcome to the program, David DeBatto, geopolitical analyst and consultant. I think we got you now. Now, David, concerning the use of those U.S. and Western weapons and ammunition, like Stephen says, should President Macron say, yes, the troops amassed there just across the border from the Sumy region are fair game?
On the record for a very long time saying that I think it's ludicrous, ridiculous, and counterproductive to tie Ukraine's hands behind their back and not strike back at a nation that is attacking them. It goes against the rules of all warfare. No other nation would do this. And I can only believe that Biden, who is a creature of the Cold War, is somehow still thinking that there can be some kind of reconciliation or rapprochement with Putin after the war is over. And he's fearing the so-called escalation if he allows U.S. weapons to be used deeper inside of Russia. That's nonsense. And the Ukrainians are paying the price for that mistaken policy every day.
So we heard from Mr. Scholz, and I think it's only fair if we, since we're already on the subject of tying Ukraine's hands behind its back, if we're going to hear from U.S. President Joe Biden. So let's have a short soundbite from him as well.
Aggression and greed, the desire to dominate and control, to change borders by force, these are perennial. The struggle between a dictatorship and freedom is unending. Here in Europe, we see one stark example. Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant bent on domination. Ukrainians are fighting with extraordinary courage, suffering great losses, but never backing down. They've been inflicted on the Russian aggressors. They've suffered tremendous losses in Russia. The numbers are staggering. 350,000 Russian troops dead or wounded. Nearly 1 million people have left Russia.
So we are hearing about the staggering losses from U.S. President Joe Biden. On the other hand, we hear that Russia manages to actually overcome the sanctions, and it's starting to produce its own weapons. It's starting to use more Western technology. The question now is, how much more can Russia take, and if actually it is in a position of disadvantage, if these losses are enough for Ukraine to actually stand a chance to the aggressor? And that would be the question for David. So let's hear from you first.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that a lot, if not most, of the Western media are constantly painting a gloom and doom story for Ukraine and trying to make Russia look again as invincible and coming back and roaring back despite all their numerous losses. That's just not the case. Russia has taken an incredible hit, not only just to their soldiers and to their equipment, but to their morale. A day doesn't go by where stories are leaked out about Russian soldiers who are deserting, who are being shot when they try to desert, and who are trying to actually kill their own commanders. Look, very quickly, I want to just say President Biden, as part of a speech today, said how the United States and the West must rally behind Ukraine as we did 80 years ago on this day with Europe. Well, we're doing nothing of the kind. We're not uniting against Russia as we did against the Nazis. A strategy for as long as it takes is no strategy at all. We have to do like we did 80 years ago and make a strategic commitment for Russia to lose, for Ukraine to win. Until that has been stated, at least by my President Biden, this is going to drag on for a very long time with a very high cost to Ukraine.
Stephen, it seemed to be the case that you were a little surprised for a moment with what was said just a second ago. Any response to what David just said?
Listen, I think David's right on target. What I see is that President Biden has, for a long time, had some very powerful rhetoric about supporting Ukraine and standing up to Russia. Unfortunately, many of the actions we're seeing from the Biden administration don't reflect that rhetoric. And I'm talking about taking 10 months to get 31 M1A1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. I'm talking about last year in February, in January, F-16s were a good idea. In May, they were a bad idea in January. They're a good idea in May, and they're still not there. And we're seeing a slow movement of artillery to the front, and some of the American weapons that were appropriated in late April by Congress are just getting there. And so I think that it's important that Congress holds President Biden's feet to the fire. And Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who put it all on the line, in late April to get this passed. Mike Johnson has a job as the third most powerful man in America, and he said, "I'm willing to lose this job to get aid to Ukraine." Now he's deeply invested, and he's calling out Biden. He's saying, "You need to move more quickly. You need to let Ukrainians use our weapons to strike inside Russia."
Yeah, he certainly has changed his tune, for sure. And that's probably a good sign moving forward into these elections. Now, David, this strategy, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said that the West, probably referring to the United States, is very concerned. In fact, they can't imagine a Russian defeat. And so in light of that statement, Do you think that the United States is scared of the aftermath of what a Russian defeat would look like? Therefore, we have no cohesive strategy there in Ukraine?
It's a good point. Again, as I've said, we have no cohesive strategy for Ukraine to win and for Russia to lose. So, I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we have to, and I can't stress this enough, the United States, through President Biden, needs to state clearly, we are going to stay with Ukraine and ensure a Russian defeat. A Russian defeat. That may be hard to say, but they need to lose. And Russia needs to win. If we were doing as we did 80 years ago, I wouldn't be speaking to you here today. This war would be over and Russia would have lost. We can do, and I'd say the West and America specifically, can do amazing things when we get our act together, our industry, our factories, our weapons production, our political will. Right now, both sides of Congress, believe it or not, the left and the right are pretty much united on this, even with all our other bickering and problems. Most of Congress wants to support Ukraine. What they lack is leadership. They need President Biden to take the helm on this and the leadership and just guide them and do what needs to be done. Get those weapons over there. Get the Ukrainians trained in F-16s, which we haven't even talked about. Get the F-16s over there. Allow the ATACMS and all the other long-range missile systems to be used to go wherever they need to do to defend Ukraine. But we need a strategy. We need President Biden to come out and say, we are going to ensure that Russia loses, period, full stop.
Stephen, it seems to be the case that a good start, a good beginning, or maybe I should say a continuation to this strategy would be for President Biden to actually attend the Peace Summit in Switzerland coming up next. But we know that he is not going to show himself there. Do you think that President Zelenskyy, upon his meeting with U.S.'s President Joe Biden, is actually going to try and convince him yet again to take part? And if he doesn't succeed, what does this mean for Ukraine?
Well, I think the peace summit, there's no peace that's going to come out of that summit, okay? This is a coalition building exercise for Zelenskyy. And so it's important to have President Biden there. It's important to have as many foreign leaders as he can there, because this is a global war. Whether it's World War III is up to the historians to decide. But you've got Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea all working together along with their various hangers-on. And they're causing chaos in Ukraine, the Middle East, and around the world. So it's important for President Zelenskyy in this peace summit to build this coalition, because as another example we haven't talked about is that there's $300 billion in Russian assets that have been frozen by countries in Europe primarily, and France primarily among them. So with Macron in this meeting, Macron has just gone from Macron is trying to throw off a 100-year reputation of France being the military coward of Europe in order to, he's talking very tough on Russia now. So Macron controls tens of billions of dollars in Russian money. That money could be used to for the Ukrainians to persecute the war. It can be used for reconstruction. That is a decision that needs to be made in Europe, and this is an opportunity for Zelenskyy to make that case to Macron and have President Biden back him up.
Now, gentlemen, we are on the first day of the European parliamentary elections. Voting has already taken place in the Netherlands. And of course, we will vote all over the continent. That we'll choose the makeup of the European Parliament. They say a lot is at stake in the next 5 years in Europe. Security being on top of the campaign slogans, along with some other issues. But from a security standpoint, David, what is at stake for Ukraine, do you believe, in these upcoming European elections?
Well, as the previous guest just said, and I'm going to say that I'm not going to throw all of this on Biden. Europe needs to step up, and they have. They have really done a lot better in the last few months, including President Macron and Chancellor Scholz. Things are changing, but the elections are extremely important. I just read some recent reports where the amount of interest among citizens of the EU is at record levels. They are now interested. Something like 68 or 70% of all eligible voters in EU countries are going to vote this time. That's a great sign. It's incredibly important because the EU, if never before, Europe in general, needs to be united as never before since World War II. They're starting to do that. They're starting to come around. This is not a situation where individual countries, even strong countries like Germany and France, can do this alone. They need to be united. And it seems as if they're just starting to. These elections are extremely important. I've talked to several candidates actually recently for the EU Parliament, the EU Commission, and they're very excited. And so I'm excited. I hope that it does coalesce because we need Europe to be united on this. America can be the leader, but Europe, NATO and the EU has to pull their weight.
Stephen, the same question to you. What do you think this EU parliamentary election could potentially change for Ukraine?
Well, I'm watching Hungary. Viktor Orban is Putin's biggest cheerleader in the EU, and he now has a credible opponent. This guy Magyar has brought crowds and crowds of people into the street, and they're not waving EU flags, they're waving the colors of Hungary. So these are his traditional supporters that are coming out and saying, you know, we're kind of tired of you, Mr. Orban. And so if Orban is politically weakened in these EU elections, then that's a victory for Ukraine. So I'm watching Hungary, and I would echo David, is that, you know, what we need, America, as an example, America is tuned up right now to fight a war on 1.5 fronts. So, and we've got a two-front war right now. If the Pacific opens up, if, you know, China inevitably goes into Taiwan, they've said they're going to do it, then we've got a three-front war. So it's important for Europe to rebuild its defense industrial base, because we're going to need all the firepower we can get if we're going to see the kind of war that's being telegraphed.
It's that time, all hands on deck. Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, and David DeBatto, geopolitical analyst and consultant. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you guys.